You're listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. My name is Christian Peterson, and I will be your host today. Today, we are going to be talking about something that is absolutely crucial in relationship and in communication, namely being heard or feeling heard. It's a really big deal for a lot of us, and when we don't feel heard, all kinds of problems can ensue. As an illustration, we got an email from a man who said this. He said, I feel as a man that being heard is a real issue. I'm really working on, I'm making efforts to be honest and open, but I do not seem to feel heard. It seems to me that my wife wants me to talk and share feelings and be open so long as it fits her agenda or ideals. And that just sends me back to the point where I feel sharing isn't even worth it. Now, we don't know this man's circumstances, but it is easy to see that whatever is going on, if he's having the experience of trying to share and be open, and he has the experience of not feeling heard, as he said, one of the results is, I'm just going to stop sharing altogether. So in today's podcast, as well as on the accompanying article we posted on our blog, we're going to offer you some components and elements and different angles that are relevant to the topic of feeling heard. And then we're, of course, going to make it relevant to your relationship and share some ideas for how you can use what we're talking about here when it comes to feeling heard. Sonica shared an experience, a typical experience for her when she was a kid. She said, when I was a kid and when I didn't understand something my father was saying, he would simply say it again, but louder. Now, if I still didn't get it, from his point of view, if I still didn't hear what he was saying the second or the third time, he would just get louder, both in volume and enunciation, and probably get a little angry at the same time, until he reached the point of yelling, which for him just resulted in complete exasperation, and for Sonica resulted in her bursting into tears because there was no way she understood what he was saying. Can you relate to this? Can you relate to her dad's experience or to her experience? Like, do you ever have that experience that you feel totally frustrated or angry to the point of either yelling or giving up because your partner or maybe your kid, somebody just can't get your message. They don't hear what you're trying to say. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning, for a lot of people, feeling heard is a really big trigger point. And conversations can easily escalate to yelling and sometimes even violence if people feel misunderstood enough. The feeling heard is an absolutely crucial part of the two-way communication process. One person speaks or delivers a message somehow, maybe non-verbally, and the other person deciphers that communication in the form of listening and receiving. So hearing is an important part of what we think of as the communication bridge in relationship. It makes connection and it makes taking action possible. It makes it so that we can coordinate our actions. And if we miss this communication, if we don't hear what the other person is trying to convey, then it's kind of like we fall off the bridge of connection. And, in extreme instances, miscommunications like these can even be life-threatening. You could be a firefighter or out on emergency services, and if communication isn't precise, bad things can happen. But, for most of us in our everyday relationships, that's not the case. But even if the misunderstandings are about something mundane as, the dishes or whose job it is to take out the trash or pick up the kids, while it's not entirely life-threatening, sometimes we can still feel as if we're going to explode or get super frustrated if the other person just can't get our side of things. And I'll tell you, for so many people we coach around relationships, for example, when a couple comes to our coaching office, one of the biggest complaints we get is one or both parties saying, I feel like my partner isn't hearing me. And in arguments and fights and protracted conflicts, they will often continue until the point where both people feel that their message was heard. Sonica and I got, a while back, we got certified to be mediators through a program here in Nevada County put on by the court system and a nonprofit that operates in conjunction with the court system. And one of the things we learned during that certification program was that when a case could be a property line dispute, for example, it could be child custody disputes. When these types of disputes get sent to mediation, the success rate with which they get solved is vastly increased. And one of our mentors said that really the big difference is that when you do mediation, both parties, through the facilitation of the mediator, they get to have their point of view heard, which is not always the case if you go in front of a judge who will just make a ruling either way. But in mediation, both parties get to get heard. So how they taught us was the most important thing before we do anything is that both parties may feel heard. Once they do, typically they are willing to look for solutions. So it's just a great example of how feeling heard has very practical and very real applications. So what is it we're actually going for when we want to be heard? And why is it such a big deal when we don't have that experience? So here we're gonna share some of the reasons why being heard is important, and we'll give you some examples from coaching sessions, and we'll share how this is useful in your relationship. So first place we're going to go here is what we call agreement. For some of us, being heard means that we're going to get what we want. We believe that the experience of being heard will result in the other person seeing our side of things, agreeing with us, and that they will do what we want them to do. I remember Sonic and I, we had a very heated conversation with our son when he was in his teens. He was trying to talk us into having a party, the kind of party with drugs and drinking around our pool at our house while we weren't here and no other adults were here. And there was no way we were going to let him do that. And we weren't budging on that decision. But even though we were hearing what he was saying and we were reflecting back to him his very well-intentioned points, he still insisted that we weren't hearing him because we weren't changing our minds about the result. He was confusing hearing with agreeing. He was confusing hearing with doing what I want you to do. Now, then there's a part we think of as call to action. For some of us, being heard means that you're going to get my words and the call to action behind my words, or the request behind my words. In the example above that Sonica shared with about her dad, her dad was confusing her not understanding what he was saying with her not being able to hear what he was saying. He was speaking to Sonica like she was, someone who was hard of hearing or she didn't speak English properly. But it wasn't that she wasn't hearing his words. It was the meaning behind the words that she couldn't hear or make sense of. She didn't understand. And hence, she could not take the action he was requesting. It was impossible for her. For example, the example Sonica gave is he was asking her to give him a wrench. But she had no idea what a wrench was. She just did not know. And him yelling louder about it or saying it 10 times, it didn't change anything about the fact that she doesn't know what a wrench is. So she was unable to take the call to action that he was wanting her to take. So in order for us to hear a request that is where a response or action is desired, it really helps if the speaker can be direct with their requests. But in the world of relationship, we're often very indirect in our communications. For example, if I say the garbage is overflowing, I'm likely to not feel heard if you take what I said as simply an informational report rather than as a request. And the direct request would sound something like, will you take out the garbage? And for a lot of us, when someone says the garbage is overflowing, we take it just like that, as an informational little update. Okay, thank you very much. Nice observation. I see that too. And we don't necessarily hear the request and the call to action that's embedded in there. So it really helps if you can just make a direct request and say, will you take out the garbage? There's a really important part about feeling heard that is about feeling known or seen. We did a whole podcast episode about feeling seen a while back too. You can go check that out. And the man I mentioned in the beginning who sent us that email, remember he said that I'm really working on making efforts to be honest and open, but I don't feel heard in my relationship. It seems that my wife wants me to talk and share my feelings, but only so long as it fits her agenda or ideals, which sends me back to the point where I feel sharing is not worth it. And for many of us, sharing and being heard is a way for us to know ourselves and to experience feeling known by others. When we put our internal experiences on loudspeaker, so to say, and we're able to freely explore our thoughts, our feelings, our values, dreams, our desires, the inner machinations inside, we come to accept and know ourselves more deeply. And when someone else can hear our ruminations with curiosity, with interest, without judgment and interruption, we feel known, we feel seen, we feel witnessed, we feel close to the listener. We feel less alone in our separate existences and in our separate experiences. Not only that, but we're way more inclined to want to continue sharing ourselves if we are received and heard when we do. And just like the man who shared, that brings me back to the point where I feel there's no point in sharing. How many of you can relate to being in relationships where there's just way too little open, honest sharing? Sometimes it's because the sharer over a long period of time has felt not heard and conclude what our man here said, that, hey, it's just not worth it anymore. Now then there's a part about meaning. Sonika shared that she witnessed in a coaching program, she witnessed a coaching session that was really moving. The coach was listening to his client talk about her mixed feelings about having moved from New York, or having to move from New York back to Italy. That's where she was from, after being in the States for several years. She spoke of herself as a risk taker. She highlighted her successes, pretty upbeat, and spent most of the time talking about the challenging logistics of moving. When it came to the coach reflecting back what he had heard, he added, although she didn't say this directly, he added having heard her underlying fears and concerns about looking like a failure to her family because she was coming back home. She was returning home earlier than she thought. And she was really affected by his reflections and seeing the truth of what he was saying. So he had listened not just to her words, but to the deeper meaning, which in this case was her deeper fears behind her story, behind her words. And another client of ours was complaining about her husband's preoccupation with work. And his long hours at work meant that there was less time at home, and she was fed up with having to do everything herself. Instead of reacting defensively to her criticisms, with our support, he was able to listen, we say underneath or behind her complaint, to what was the loving desire underneath, which is to have more time together. So instead of hearing her disapproval and criticism, he was able to hear her loving desire to connect with the man she loved. And this allowed him to lean into creating more connection time with his wife and family at home. So it's really useful for all of us if we listen not just to the spoken words, not just to the garbage can is full, but to the underlying meaning, I would really like for you to empty the garbage. Whether we do it or not is another matter, but if we hear it, it will definitely improve our communication and our connection. Then there's a part about validation. Sometimes what we want in our quest to be heard is validation. It's affirmation of who we are. We want to know that we are okay as human beings, that we are loved, and that we matter. It's like when you hear my words, when you respond to my requests, or you meet my needs, or say yes to me, you mirror back my deep feelings. It's like I get to feel I am important in your eyes. Your acceptance of me, helps me accept myself. Your love for me helps me love myself more. You taking my shares seriously helps me take my shares seriously. One of our favorite definitions of love is granting space for something or someone to exist as they are right now. When you hear and allow what I say without resistance or judgment or commentary, it's like you're allowing me to exist just as I am in your acceptance of my communication. In this way, you can say that hearing me is actually one of the deepest expressions of love and acceptance that you can offer. It is one of the best gifts we can give to any human being, be it our child, our brother, sister, spouse, somebody. Then, of course, when we talk about hearing, we also have to talk about the quest to be right about stuff. Sonika shared how she recently coached a couple they were stuck in negative stories about each other, and she was afraid. The woman in this couple was afraid that he was withholding secrets from her, and she wanted access to his phone. He felt micromanaged. He didn't want to give her access because he thought that would make him just feel powerless and controlled. And in each of their positions, their listening of each other was shaped by their own fears and negative stories. Every time she shared her fears, all he heard was her saying, "I want to micromanage you." Every time he moved to protect his autonomy by saying, "No, you can't look at my phone," for example, all she really heard was, "I am withholding secrets from you." They really couldn't hear the underlying fear of their mate, which is something like, I'm afraid to lose you if you talk to your ex or too much to your friends, or I'm afraid of feeling rejected if I do something that scares you. They were too busy fighting to be right about the other person being either micromanaging or withholding to get the deeper meaning behind the words. Sometimes our communications are attempting to prove our innocence and our goodness. It's like, if I can just get you to hear that the reason I didn't make dinner was because I took care of the cat, then you will quit judging me as wrong and bad for not keeping my agreement to cook you dinner. It's like, once you hear me, I will get to be right about not making dinner as promised, and I can get to convince myself, oh yeah, I really am a good person, instead of feeling bad about the agreement I broke. So those are some of the elements of being heard. We're not saying this is the exhaustive list by any means. It's just a huge topic. But we want to also point out a few ways in which this can be useful for you. Remember that there are many different experiences and results that we are really going for when we're trying to be heard. The most important thing we can do to help ourselves to feel heard in relationships is to first explore that very thing. What is it exactly I'm after here? Am I after feeling known? Am I after wanting to be right about something? Am I after getting my way about something? Am I wanting you to take an action? Am I wanting you to do what I ask you to do? Or am I wanting something to change, for example? The next thing to remember is that, we human beings work as closed biological systems with our own interpretations and understandings of everything. If I feel that you are not hearing me, maybe there is something going on in you that is preventing you from hearing me. Maybe you have an old negative story about me that has you interpret what I'm saying as criticism versus a compliment. Or maybe you have a different definition of what, say, helping around the house means than I do. And what's really required is more clarification and exploration about what that means. It could also be that maybe I'm not being clear about my intention in my sharing, and I can rephrase what I'm saying in a way that produces my desired result and outcome way more easily. Instead of launching into, say, complaints about us not having sex anymore, which would probably result in you wanting to be close to me even less, I could slow things down and share how much I miss connecting with you in this really special, loving way. Instead of complaining about how you're never home, I could make a direct request and say, would you be willing to come home early on Wednesday so we can have a date together, just you and me? So if you have a partner who's often not feeling heard, you can listen. And a great way to listen is just to not fill in commentary while they share. Just make eye contact, be somewhat close, maybe hold their hand while they talk if it's someone with whom that's appropriate, and just listen. And as we've talked about, try your best to listen not just with your ears, but with all your faculties. And if I'm the one wanting to be heard, there are so many ways I can make it easier for myself. Like the example we just shared, It is just so much easier for me to get what I want if instead of saying, you just never want to hang out with me anymore, why don't we ever hang out anymore? That never produces what I want. If I instead say, I love hanging out with you, I miss us being together, would you be willing to make an evening where you and I hang out? It's just so much easier for the recipient to hear something like that. Now, if you find that clarifying your intentions or making clear requests before you go for getting heard still isn't working, it's really smart to get support from an experienced coach or a therapist to help you bridge the gap, to help you cross the connection bridge. And I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, that is all that is needed. When I tell you, we have had literally hundreds upon hundreds of examples of, say, a couple coming in, feeling completely estranged from one another, and they just cannot get their point across, and they've been fighting about the same thing for months, sometimes years. And within just the first hour's worth of conversation, where we support them to express in a way that can be heard, and we support them to actually hear, it softens up the entire boatload of tension that they have been carrying around. I remember there was one couple that were always fighting when she wanted to share something she was triggered about, and he just disappeared into work in the yard as fast as he could. And they were able to understand each other's differing responses to stress just by sitting down and having some guided coaching and guided help in getting heard. So now when she wants to talk, he can hear her desire to connect. And when he disappears into the yard to work, she can hear his desire to avoid criticism and to be a good man in her eyes. This different understanding has just helped them be less reactive, and they're better able to pause and hear each other as a result. So lastly, I want to say that your desire to be heard is a good and natural and human thing. Use it to bring you closer to all the good things you long for, and beware if you don't feel heard, beware to conclude that your partner is out to get you or they just don't want to hear you, because very often they do and just aren't aware of it. And with a little bit of support, trying some of the tools we've shared here or a little bit of support, you can absolutely cross that communication bridge and feel heard. I'll end with a quote here from L.J. Isham. Listening is an attitude of the heart, a genuine desire to be with another which both attracts and heals. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this was useful to you, and that you will go out and have conversations where you support other people to feel heard and where you get to feel heard yourself. We look very forward to being with you next time. Until then, have a good time.
You've been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your host, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. If you found this valuable, please hit the share button and share with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or your other favorite hangouts. You can find more about Sonica and Christian's work at loveworksforyou.com.